So let's start with a prayer, and then who's going to introduce the topic? Ted, are you going to talk about the topic?
Oh, I can.
Okay. All right, bow your heads. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will tell of your name to my family. Heaven and earth are full of your glory. I have chosen you from the world, says the Lord, and have appointed you to go out and bear fruit, fruit that will last forever. Amen. Go ahead, Ted, you're up.
All right, well, I'll introduce, and today's talk will be on genealogy, and Rick Nelson will lead off with the presentation, and I will come in after him. Rick's going to talk about the, I'll say the basics of genealogy and how to go about genealogy, the tools that you can use, different approaches. And Rick has spent much of his life on genealogy, much more than I have. Rick's been in genealogy, I think, almost as long as he's been alive, as I recall. And he's been involved in with the different societies of genealogy, both in the Washington, D.C. area and in Madison, Wisconsin at the Norwegian site for genealogy. So he's got a wealth of information on how to go about doing the actual research and stuff that he will share with us. I'm then going, when Rick is finished, I'm going to talk about how DNA can help with your genealogy and what it can lead to, the differences, the different things that you can learn by incorporating DNA work with your genealogy. So I'll go through that. On mine, I have a 15-minute presentation by a professional that does DNA.
Thank you.
As I was trying to put this together, which is much better than what I could do from my amateur approach. But I've got several charts that will lead into it and how I have used DNA in my genealogy work. So with that, and then you can ask questions as much as you want, and we'll try to answer them. And with that, Rick, I'll let you lead off, and then I'll jump in when you're finished.
Okay, sounds good. I talked to Dave. He's going to make the outline of my talk available after the session. So, and also Dave, in his email about this meeting, he mentioned a surprise that we had, and I think some of you already know this, but in doing our research, Ted and I discovered that we are 10th cousins. What this means is that we go back 11 generations to find our first common ancestor. And this was a guy named Ole Mikkelsen Mustad, who lived from 1579 to 1668 in south central Norway near Lillehammer. So this is our common ancestry. And we can go back a couple of generations from that, but in Norway, the Reformation came to the country in the mid 1500s. And from that point, a lot of the records were destroyed or taken to Rome or burned or whatever. So it's hard to go back much further than that. So I think we've done about what we can on that. But this is one of the dangers of genealogy. You never know what you might find or who you might be related to. And it could be Ted.
Yeah.
Another danger is that genealogy research can become highly addictive. And like Ted mentioned, I've been doing genealogy kind of off and on since I was about 20 years old. So a lot of what I have done, a lot of the early thing I did was done before the internet made it much easier. My career was in Washington, D.C., and my office was sort of halfway between the National Archives and the Library of Congress. So I spent a lot of time in both of those places looking at books and going through microfilm reels hour after hour. I spent weeks then doing what right now you can do in minutes on the internet. So it's been amazing what's happened to make this easier. I think that, you know, along with finding the statistics on birth and marriages and deaths and that sort of thing, the connections that I had made doing this research have really enriched my life. I've met and become friends with several people in the United States, England, Australia, Norway. And as a result, we've traveled to several family locations, retracing the steps of ancestors who left home for the promise of America. Genealogy is basically discovering and recording your own unique story. And this can be accomplished in any way that you see fit. You just need to get started. And this is your story, so start with you. You gather and write down all of the vital facts that you know about yourself and your family, you know, such as birth, baptism, confirmation, marriage, death records, etc., along with the obituaries, letters, newspaper articles. And what you don't know, try to fill in, ask your relatives for information that you don't have. Ask them also to share family stories. Although the stories may not always be totally accurate, they still flesh out your story and indicate then that it is oral history and not fact necessarily. That's something you can work towards and try to verify. A key to any genealogy thing is to document your facts. Documentation sets your work apart from so much of what's out there. If it's properly documented, your work can be trusted. So first, go to primary sources. Primary sources would be those that are issued by the government or a hospital or other official authority. These would include birth, marriage, death, immigration, naturalization, census, those sort of records. Even those are only as good as the information given and recorded. But at least you have an official document, and researchers and other family members or people looking at your work will know where it came from. Once you've exhausted that kind of information, the primary sources, go to secondary sources such as the family Bible, obituaries, headstones, newspaper articles, or photographs. And then, since it is your story, and this is where a lot of people fall down a little bit, add personal information. Add things like, where did you and your spouse meet? Where did you work and live? What were your hobbies or interests? What are you proud of having accomplished? Think of things that you wish that you'd asked your parents and grandparents. I would, you know, fortunately, I was interested enough in this that I did ask my parents and grandparents some of this. But even then, there are a lot of things now that I wish I had asked them. And so I try to think of that for myself when I'm writing my own story about some of the things that I wished I'd asked my parents and grandparents. And working on that, there are even, as with everything else, there's any number of online helps. There's one called Storykeeper, for example, which sends out weekly questions for you to fill out and answer about yourself or your family. And then they'll compile this at the end of the year, even into a little book. As you move on from yourself, consider writing short bios about each of the family members you knew personally. Add demographic information as well as personal insights. Before the program started, we were talking about photos a little bit. Photos can add a lot to your story. And again, be sure that they are all labeled with names, dates, locations. Include the information on the occasion on the picture, such as whether this is a birthday or a baptism or a wedding. And be sure to write in soft pencil or use stickers on the back so it doesn't press into the picture or leave ink marks. And be sure to avoid glue. There's nothing worse than glue. But I think we probably all have instances of unidentified photos. So this is key to write this down. And even with our own children, you know, sometimes you could go back to baby pictures and you're like, well, you'll never forget who that is. But when you have a couple of children and baby pictures, they start to look the same. One of my favorite examples of unidentified pictures, we have one on Maryland's side of the family. There's this woman standing in a farmyard surrounded by a bunch of chickens. And on the back of the picture, it's written, chickens 6 weeks old. No idea who the woman is or what, you know, where it was or when it was taken, but we know how old those chickens were. Next thing is to record your data once you've started to gather it. And this can be recorded in any way that you're really comfortable with. You know, it can be done paper and pencil or genealogy software. Software is very helpful, but it's not necessary. It helps you with organization. And it permits you to create tables and reports. It minimizes copying errors since you only put it in there once. And then it's available for doing, you know, manipulating it any way you want to. Also, if you have it in the computer or online, you can then easily share it with other family members rather than having to mail things out. A number of research tools are available. Ones with, you know, constantly advertised on TV is Ancestry.com. There are other ones like Family Search, for example. These online ones have good and bad aspects to them. On the positive side, especially like something like Ancestry.com and those, they have the actual primary records that have been copied, like the census records, marriage records from places, birth and death, that sort of thing, you know, which you could have otherwise spent weeks like I did in looking at microfilm reels in the archives. You know, now it's right there in front of you. Just call it up. On the negative side, well, there's a cost involved with many of these. Like a Ancestry.com subscription will be about $300 a year. Also, much of the information has been submitted by individuals. This is different than the things that have been copied. These that are submitted by individuals, such as their own family trees, have errors in them, and these become perpetuated as people pick up, you know, these family trees with errors in them, copy them into their own, and send them on. Any of these art places, you can submit family trees to one if you have a subscription to the service. And once you submit your family tree, there's no verification. Any errors in there are difficult to correct, which can be very frustrating. I know in my own instance that there's people have family trees up that have things on my own, like my parents and grandparents, and that is obviously wrong information. And it's hard to get it corrected, or if ever, I've written to these people, you either don't get a reply back, or else I'll reply back and say, try to correct me information about my dad, which, obviously is incorrect, but then people pick this up and others copy it. So it can be frustrating. So I tend to use these services more for the primary data and not worry so much about the hints and what other people have on their trees. It's important to document, again, what you have, so that when people are looking at more than one family tree there, those can see that you have sources for yours. Some of the other research tools are available are church records. You can go to church for many: baptism, confirmation, marriage, death, and burial. Many of these are available from the church. Cemetery records are another source of death and burial. And cemetery records will also have, usually have information on the next of kin, or at least whoever was responsible for paying for the plot, and whoever arranged for the burial. Court records can be very valuable. Looking at wills and probate for helping find out the children of the deceased. Land records and deeds, again, along with the probate and wills, help with the transfer of property is also important, and somehow tracing the family lines. Homestead applications were another thing. If you're fortunate enough to have people like I did that homesteaded in the Midwest, to put in a homestead application, you gave a tremendous amount of information about when you came to the country, when you were naturalized, when you started the homestead process, when you started living on the land, how much land was in cultivation, who was living with you, the size of your house, and how much livestock. I mean, there's just a wealth of information in the homestead application process, because you had to live on the land for 5 years to get it free and clear. And so there were steps along the way where you had to document what you were doing. Census records, of course, people are familiar with census records. These can provide you with a great deal of information about the family and the children. Often, if you're looking at the right years, they'll tell you when they came to this country, occupations that they're in, all that. But again, as with any of these things, there's only as good as the person who is giving the information and the person that was writing it down. And penmanship and spelling were not big priorities, I found. So there's often a bit of guesswork, even if the information is correct. It's sometimes a little hard to decipher. So you can't be too worried about it if the spelling isn't quite right, or even if some of the names are off a bit. You got to consider that somebody is writing down what they're hearing. Obituaries are another good source of information. Again, they're only as good as the person who submitted the information. But unlike a lot of these other things, they can provide family stories or that you don't get anywhere else. So the obituaries can be quite helpful. Also, similarly, are county histories and church centennial books. A number of counties have done histories, as have churches on on their centennial or other celebrations. And these usually involve information about a family provided by the family to whoever was putting the book together. And so it's usually quite accurate since it is often submitted by living people. And another thing would be to go to records of the siblings of your ancestors. If there are holes in what you have about your ancestor, go to information from a brother or sister. That can often fill in, especially places like where they came from. It's often more. Hopefully you're getting more than just a country, because if you're going to do further research, you have to know usually a location. But going to a sibling can fill in on a lot of gaps. When you get beyond that, these are things you generally can look up for yourself or write for, or that. Then you go to outside help. There are several ethnic organizations. If you're looking for most any nationality, if you're looking for German clubs or Norwegian American Genealogical Center, most of these ethnic clubs will have some sort of genealogy help that they'll either provide or give you hints to where to go or who to contact. Another one would be the Mormon or the LDS Family History Centers. These, there's one in Broomall, Pennsylvania, and they have on-site resources, and usually the pretty knowledgeable people running the center. Along with what they have on site, they have access to the Salt Lake City collections. So, you can get most anything through that's in Salt Lake City through one of these local family history centers. And they also, if you go to one of these centers, they have access to a lot of these online, like ancestry.com or Family Search or other online sources available. In that case, they're free since they're in the center. So you can access these without having to do an annual subscription. Public libraries are another source. Many times a public library genealogy section can be fairly slim, and it's often just for that local area, but not always. But even if they don't have much in their own collection, there's they can usually get books from other libraries through the sharing arrangements with other libraries, and so you can get and like the Family History Center for the Mormon Church, often you can access the online sources at the public library, like ancestry.com. It's very common for public libraries to have subscriptions to that. Another thing that I have found very helpful is online groups. Facebook, for example, is one that I have used a tremendous amount. For example, there have any number of helpful free genealogy groups. These are for counties, states, countries, surnames, any number of things. And I belong to any number of these, including England genealogy, German genealogy, Norwegian genealogy, genealogy in Denmark, North and South Dakota genealogy, Wisconsin Norwegians, and Iowa Norwegians. Again, they have experts that are usually both in this country and in the country you're looking at. And they're very good about providing you with documentation of what you're looking for. If they don't give you documentation, it's like with anything else, you can look at the information that's provided as a hint and then verify it for yourself. As with anything else, you don't take it unless there's documentation there. And in writing to these things, any of these groups, you need to join first, but that's not a big deal. You just ask to become a member, and then they'll ask you why you want to join, and you get just a brief little. And then when you're writing to it, it's important to be specific about what you're asking for, and provide as much information as possible so they have that to work with. For example, you say, like, I would like to find the marriage information for this couple who were in this city in this time period, and you almost always get an answer. It's been a tremendous resource. Another thing as you're doing your research, especially as you're getting into it a ways, try to find a mentor or someone to ask for suggestions or to join a genealogy club. If nothing else, it kind of keeps you motivated, or somebody's holding your feet to the fire a little bit if you're having the next meeting and you have to show up and say, well, once again, I didn't do anything. So it is good to have a mentor or to join a support group, a genealogy club. As a last resort, there are paid researchers, but so much of that is available now that it really is a last resort. You can do so much yourself, or go online or through other free groups, but paid researchers are available. Some of these countries, like Germany, for example, is a tough country to work with. Borders change so much, and it wasn't always a country. There are all these municipality kind of things that changed and moved, and so records were hard. Records moved to or were lost or never existed in the first place. But that's true with other countries as well. And in some of those cases, a paid researcher, can help. But anyway, that is some of the the basic tools to look at, and some of the things to get you started. And like I say, it is your story, and it's great to have for yourself, and it's great to pass on to children and grandchildren. Now Ted's going to talk about DNA. Like he said, DNA can greatly expand what you know. On the other hand, it can blow everything you think you know out of the water. But anyway, Ted's going to talk about that.
Okay, thanks, Rick. And before I get into the DNA thing, I'll echo one of the things two of the things Rick was talking about. One I haven't done, and one I've used extensively. The one I haven't done, and it's on my to-do list, but it's way over there, never seems to get on my desk, and that is the life story, because it's so important, and I need to do it because I don't have life story from either side of my family, and it would be so nice to have it. And so now I'm going to have to construct it as best I can from my own memories, from my brother's memory, and from my cousin's memories, and try to put something together. The one I have used extensively is the Facebook, the Norwegian genealogy website. And for years in the family history, we always said, we must have some family still in Norway, don't we? because my family came over in 1860s, the early 60s. And we said, there must be some living relatives still in Norway. Everybody, the people I know in the US all said, nope, there's no living relatives. They all came over here and we can't find any living relatives in Norway. And they had traveled to Norway, of which I had not traveled to look for family. They could not find any family. I tried on the Facebook site a couple of times at Rick's encouraging and never found a hit, never got any good information, always got back, nope, they all migrated to the US. There's no trace of the family here. So a couple of years into it, Rick asked me at one of our genealogy meetings, he said, hey, did you ever get any more input on that? And I said, no, I've given up. I've tried it 3 or 4 times. I get nothing. He said, well, just put it out there again. So I did. And I had the good detail because I had the great-great-grandparents who migrated over here, grandma and grandpa and their siblings, all 5 of them that came over and the times that they left Norway. So I had all that detail in there. I got a note back about the second day after I had posted it. And this guy told me, he says, yeah, he says, I think you have many living relatives in Norway. He said, give me the following information. And so I gave him what he asked for because he needed a few more details to confirm. I gave him that. And about a week later, he came back with about 20 pages of family history of living relatives in Norway, a 4th cousin. And she's about the same age as our daughter, and her mother, she's a 4th once removed. Her mother is my 4th cousin. And the interesting thing about this lady is when I was in Norway the year before that and stayed at a nice hotel in Seljord, Norway, she's a school teacher at the school right next to that hotel. And had I known that, I could have personally met her. We've exchanged emails back and forth a few times since, but don't give up. If you use the genealogy, you take Rick's advice to use one of these Facebook genealogy groups and you don't get information, don't give up. Put it out there because everybody's not monitoring it on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of a matter of what you put out there and the person who might be the connection point looks at it that day and bingo, you get the hit. So it's a great source to use. Can be frustrating because it can take you a couple of years, 2-3 years before you get the information you're looking for. So now I'll go into some of the DNA and how that fits in with the genealogy work. I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully I can do it well for myself. Okay, do you have that? Can you see that?
Yes.
Because I can see it. Okay, so how to use DNA to assist in your genealogy research. It doesn't give you good, crisp answers right away. You still need to dig into it, but you do, it can be a big help. So first thing, what is DNA? And I probably need Dave Goodall's help on this word, deoxyribonucleic acid. I guess that's why we call it DNA, because nobody can pronounce it.
You did a good job.
So it's the piece of our body that contains the biologic instructions that make each of us unique. And we have that makes us unique, and other combinations makes our relatives unique. And the important point is, second point here, it contains the instructions that are passed to our offspring. So that's how the DNA moves down. So what element of DNA is key to genealogy? it took me a while I was looking at DNA on Ancestry and just using the shared information. It says you share DNA with this person so much, we think that's a second cousin. And then I noticed this code on the DNA, and it's centimorgans. So what is a centimorgan? Centimorgan is a measurement. It's a genetic measurement that says how much of your DNA is shared with another person. It's what they use to try to define where in the relationship chain these two people share their genealogy. It's, as it says on this one point, it's more a measure of probability. It's not a guarantee. These are all estimates, but it says, what do you share with this person? And it's probably a good chance that you are truly related. And then you can go from there. So these are centimorgans. When you look at any DNA information related to genealogy, you're going to see this probably in the little brackets around it, how many centimorgans this person and you share. For example, if your parents and to your child, you're going to share around 3,400 centimorgans. But as you move on down the chart, you can see they start getting lower and lower. And one of the things, usually the centimorgans in that last one, the 6 to 20, you're starting to get into the 5th to 8th cousins. And that's why when Rick and I look at because we both have our DNA on Ancestry for matching to see who we might be related to, we don't show up, even though we are 10th cousins. There's such a small amount of shared centimorgans on us that we don't show up in these DNA studies that are done by the different groups. They're just too far back. Okay, so this one helps you know. If you got the ones that most people look at is this one, the 30 to 40. If you're below 30 centimorgans with a person that comes up as a suggested match, the likelihood that it's a common ancestor drops dramatically, someplace in the 15 to 50% range. So the ones you want to spend your time on are those that are above 16, because those are probably worth pursuing to find out how you're related. Okay, a big question that comes up, at least in conversations I've had, is why is my DNA different from my sibling? And when I get updates from Ancestry and MyHeritage, they send out updates, say, wait a minute, I used to be 50% Norwegian. Now I get an update and I'm only 30% Norwegian. Or in my wife's case, the first one she got, she thought she was 50% Norwegian, but she ended up on the first DNA thing down around 15 to 20%. Now, excuse me, now she's down to about 2 or 5% Norwegian. You say, well, why is that? Well, it's because as the DNA testing organizations for genealogy work get more and more people into the pool that they are matching against, they can be more precise on how much DNA you're getting from another country. Because the DNA doesn't come through and says, well, this little DNA is from Norway, this little DNA is from Germany, and this one is from here. It's all by matching, and they have reference points that they use on people that have been confirmed to have these characteristics. So it's all based on estimates, pretty good estimates, because I haven't found one that's totally wrong, but I have found some that I can't explain. Let me give you an example of why this is messy, so bear with me, of how the DNA passes down. Because the general thinking is that if you're up here, if your father is all Norwegian and your mother is all Norwegian, you will be all Norwegian. Or if one was of one nationality and one was the other, you would become 50-50. And so if your father and your mother were both 50-50 of two different nationalities, the natural expectation is that each of the children will be 50-50 also, because you get half of your DNA from your father and you get half of your DNA from your mother. That's not 100% correct, because we get a smidgen more DNA from our mother than we do of our father. If you want to get really picky on it, you probably get 50.5% from your mother and 49.5% from your father. There's a little bit more that comes from the mother passed down to the child than from the father. Not enough to mess things up though. So what happens if you look at the DNA coming down to child 1, that child's going to get 50% of his or her DNA from the father. And in this example, got all 3 blue, and from the mother, got 2 of the blue and 1 of the red. So in this case, while both the father and the mother were 50-50 red-blue, child number 1 is going to say 83% blue and 17% red. So all of a sudden you say, well, how can that be? You know, must be something wrong here. But it's not. It's because the passing of the DNA, while it's 50% from the father, 50% from the mother, it doesn't necessarily come down in equal pieces from the parent. It comes randomly. So then if you look at child 2, get 2 of the blue from the father and 1 of the red from the father, but then of the mother, 2 of the red and 1 of the blue, which miraculously does end up in 50-50, even though the child did not receive 50-50 from either one of the parents. Then you can go in the other extreme. Child 3 is getting only 1 of the blue from the father, 2 of the red, and 2 of the red from the mother, and only 1 blue one from the mother. And so that one's 67% red. So now you look at child 3 versus child 1, and you say, how can they have the same parent? This one is 83% blue. This one's only 33% blue. Nothing wrong with it. It's the miraculousness of how DNA moves from the parent to the child. And so you should not get concerned when you look at the DNA results, if you have them or when you do them, and you have siblings that turn out to have a whole different DNA structure, different genealogy, different history than your sibling. That's, I think, yeah, this is my wife, Cheryl, and her oldest brother, Gilbert. Cheryl says she's 76% Scot. She's almost lost all her Norwegian stuff. So Rick and I have to think whether we let her stay in the Sons of Norway Club or not. She's getting close to getting tossed out. So Gilbert has 57% Scot. Cheryl is 76. Gilbert's is more like what we would expect for the Scottish side, but still not what we would have expected on the Norwegian side. Because if you do just straight math using you think DNA gets passed down equally from the parents, we would have expected both of them to be around 12.5%. We used to think 25%, but we discovered that one of the relatives was not what we thought they were. So that's how you can have big differences between two children. Now I'm going to take you through, let this expert take us through the DNA YouTube video by Diane Southard. she presented it at a conference on genealogy called Roots Tech, sponsored by Family Search. Hopefully I can get this up. It's a little bit, takes a while before she starts to talk.
Hello, my name is Diane Southard. Welcome to 4 Steps to DNA Success. Now, DNA can be a complicated endeavor, but I've found that if you break it down into concrete, actionable items, you can make a lot more progress than you might otherwise. So let's get started. Number 1, you need to determine a goal. Just like any other area in your life, if you wandered onto your DNA testing company website and started clicking on things randomly, you might learn some things, but in general, you're not going to get very far. So when you're making a goal for your DNA test, what you want to keep in mind is that you need to be looking for an ancestor who is fewer than 6 generations back from you. I like to think of it kind of in this way. If you're searching for someone who's your 4 times great-grandparent, you would need your 5th cousins to help you find answers to those ancestors. And those 5th cousins, they just don't share very much DNA with you. And DNA connections that far back can be a little bit, shall we say, wobbly. So do yourself a favor, and if you're going to use DNA testing for your family history, stick within this kind of 5-6 generation mark in your family tree. Now, of course, you're going to need to get a DNA test. So choose one of these 5 companies. They are what I would consider to be the genetic genealogy companies. They offer DNA testing, but they're also interested in helping you find an ancestor. Now, if you can't test with all of them, which is, I guess, the best advice I can give you, then this is a good option also. You can do something we call transferring. So transferring involves giving your actual DNA sample, your saliva or your cheek swab, to a company. They do the analysis, they generate a nice data file, and then you take that data file and you transfer it to another DNA testing company. This is a cheap and effective way to get your DNA into multiple databases. It's cheap because transferring is free. Yes, it's free, which, well, you really can't beat free. So if you don't want to physically test with every company, which is probably the best thing you can do, that's fine. You can physically test with Ancestry or 23andMe and then transfer your results into MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, or Living DNA. Of course, what are you really looking for? What's the ideal situation? Well, I think the ideal situation is you use the tools at the DNA testing company to find what you're looking for. I know it sounds kind of simple, but really you want a company who's going to provide you with a good ethnicity estimate, some genetic tools, some genealogy tools, with a large enough database that's going to make it possible for you to find that one person that can help you answer the questions that you have. Now, which company can best do that for you? Well, I think every company has the potential to help you find that one person. But when we're thinking about numbers, you probably want companies who have the most number of people tested and who have genealogy tools. In my analysis, those 2 companies would be Ancestry and 23andMe, with MyHeritage coming in a very close third. Their database is much smaller, but they are so laser focused on your genealogy that I think they still have a lot of things that can help you. So that's first. Do the right thing, make a good goal, take a good DNA test. The second thing is really to understand relationships. So if you don't understand relationships, you're going to have a difficult time understanding your DNA test results. And when I say relationships, this is really what I mean. If you're looking at someone who's your 3rd cousin, it's important to know, even if it's just in the back of your mind, that that person, your 3rd cousin, is going to share one set of 2 times great grandparents with you. That's what makes them a 3rd cousin. They share one set of 2 times great grandparents. So that's your genealogy relationship to someone, but you also have a genetic relationship to someone. Your genetic relationship is measured in something we call a centimorgan. It's just a unit of measure for DNA. So the centimorgan is important, and it does help us determine relationships. So understanding that this genetic relationship relates to a genealogy relationship helps us better understand our DNA matches. The problem is there are a lot of genealogy relationships that correspond to a few genetic relationships. So for example, your DNA testing company, they might tell you that these 3 people are your third cousins. Great, fantastic. All that means is that they're sharing the right amount of DNA to be a third cousin. It doesn't mean they are genealogically your third cousin, because people who share that much DNA could be your second cousin once removed or your second cousin twice removed. Now, before I go into my definition of removes, I just want you to really understand this idea of a genealogy relationship and a genetic relationship. So take a look at this. Let's say your genetic relationship says that you share 127 centimorgans. Okay, your genetic relationship then translates into a handful of genealogy relationships. So when you share 127 centimorgans, you could be half second cousins, or perhaps second cousins once removed, or maybe first cousins 3 times removed, or maybe third cousins, and I could go on. Do you see what's going on here? If you don't, let's do another example. Let's say you share 85 centimorgans with someone. Well, then you could be third cousins, half second cousins once removed, second cousins twice removed, first cousin 3 times removed. Do you get the picture? Just in case you don't, I have one more example. Do you see the problem here? That you have one genetic relationship represented by the amount of DNA that you share with someone. But that one genetic relationship opens up a wide variety of possibilities for your genealogy relationship. So just understanding that concept is going to help you be smarter in evaluating your DNA matches. Now, before we go on, I promised that we would understand what a removed relationship is. So here you are the child of your parents, and there's both of your grandparents. And I think you'll recognize that your first cousin is the child of one of your aunts or uncles, right? Now, I want you to think in your mind to yourself, picture your first cousin's child. Do you have that person in your mind? That person is your first cousin once removed. Okay? So that's usually the way we think of first cousins once removed, or somebody who's younger than us. They're the same age as our children, for example. But you can also have first cousins once removed that are older than you. So if you think about your father's first cousin, that person is actually your first cousin once removed. Okay? So when we see these relationships, you have to remember that the removed really just means that someone is on a different generation than you are. Okay, so in addition to these removed relationships, it's possible you have half relationships in your family tree. So again, here's Jim, here's his first cousin. Usually first cousins share about 800 centimorgans. Okay, but what if Jim's grandfather had another marriage from which he had other children who have other children? So that person now is going to be Jim's half first cousin. And amazingly, he'll also share about half the amount of DNA that a regular first cousin would share. Okay, so it's really important that you just understand that there's all these different kinds of relationships that can really be your genealogy relationship when you share a certain amount of DNA with someone else. All right, so we've covered determining your goal, staying focused, and understanding just relationships in general, and really the difference between a genetic relationship and a genealogy relationship. All right, now how do you move forward from here? How do you take that list of DNA matches and really dive in and start doing some genealogy? I'm going to call this next step counting cousins. And really, it's just sitting back and asking yourself, what kinds of cousins can help me answer the question that I have about my family history? So, for example, if you are looking for this ancestral couple right here, this is one of your 2 times great grandparent couples. You're looking for them. You don't know who they are. What kinds of cousins can help you answer this question? And if you think about it, then you know other descendants of this couple would be your third cousins, right? Let's say this couple, let's make up a good story so that we can kind of frame it. Let's say this couple were immigrants and they moved here to the United States and they brought their youngest child with them. That was your ancestor, their youngest child. And you know who that is, but you know that they left back in their home country some other siblings that had jobs and had families already that stayed. Those descendants would be your third cousins. So understanding what kind of cousin can help you helps you focus on the right place in your DNA match list. So you would just go into your DNA testing company, you would look at your match list for those who are labeled with some kind of third cousin category. Let's say this is your list of matches in that third cousin category. What are you going to do with them? Well, first of all, you're going to look for known matches. These are people who you can tell by either you know them personally or you can see in their family history that they're connected to one of your other ancestors. So let's say you're able to make those connections to all of these third cousins, leaving only Polly and Martin. Therefore, Polly and Martin are what I call your best matches. They're the ones you're going to start with. They're the ones that you're going to contact. You're going to focus on their genealogy, trying to look for common locations, for example, that might lead you to the identity of your missing ancestral couple. So that's the basics of how to attack a match list. Decide your question and then focus on the relationship that's going to help you answer your question. So that's step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 4 will always be do genealogy, because after all, this is genetic genealogy. And hopefully that makes you excited that we've kind of gotten over the genetic part and now we're into the do genealogy part. So let's go back to our example with Polly and Martin. Essentially, it's time to do genealogy and you have a choice. You can either do your own genealogy and look for Polly and Martin as descendants of a couple, or you can do their genealogy, do other people's genealogy. And let me just tell you up front, if you're going to do genetic genealogy, you will spend a lot of time doing other people's genealogy. So let's see how that might look. So if we're looking at Polly and Martin, what do we know about them? We know how they're connected to you because of their DNA. We determined that they were some kind of third cousin. At least that's where we're going to start. I call this your generation of connection. This is where you need to look in Polly and Martin's tree in order to find your connecting ancestor. So what does that mean? Well, it means you need to know all of those ancestors on that third cousin line for Polly and Martin. You're probably going to need to do some of their genealogy. The hope is, as you're doing their genealogy, you don't hit the same brick walls that you have with your own genealogy, and you're able to identify that ancestral couple that you're missing, but that you share with one of them. So doing other people's genealogy is a really good way to try to figure out the line that you're missing. But honestly, you can get a long ways by doing your own genealogy. For example, you have all of these ancestors on that line, and if you haven't done descendancy research to find all of the relatives that come down off of these lines, it's possible that Polly and or Martin actually descends from a line you already know. You just didn't recognize it. So it's helpful to do your own descendancy research. We spend so much time trying to push our lines back, and we should. But in genetic genealogy, one of the most helpful things you can do to help you solve an unknown ancestor problem is to find out as much as you can about your known ancestors. And that involves doing descendancy research on these lines. So give that a try, and perhaps you'll be able to identify more of your DNA matches verify connections, and leave you open to really recognizing which matches don't fit in your current knowledge and therefore may lead you to find the ancestors that you're missing. So that's it. That's your 4 steps to DNA success. There's a lot of meat in here, so start at the beginning, go step by step, one by one, and see what you can find. Thank you for joining me. Again, my name is Diane Southard, and you can do the DNA. You just need the right teacher.
Closed it out too soon. Oh, what did I do here? There. Sorry about that. Operator error. So I think you've got a good picture from what she talked about on the relationships and first cousin once removed and so forth. If anybody wants to understand that more, I'd be willing to help. But the once removed, the twice removed, 3 times removed can sometimes be confusing. So, but real simple, I'll try to just review it. The siblings are up here, then the children of the siblings are first cousins. The next one down would be a first cousin once removed, and then the children of your once removed cousin become a second removed. So it's always another generation or more down from in the line. Now, that's kind of it on the technicals of DNA. I share with you briefly a finding that I had called the Jerome Nielsen family tree, and this is a simplified one. This came about, Jerome Nielsen is a first cousin of mine that I did not know existed until a couple years ago, and he's 1934, he's in his mid 80s. And he was adopted. He was given up at birth. He was the son of a relationship that my aunt had, as it turns out, my aunt Esther. And that's his father, who we discovered going through this DNA work. He sent me a note through Ancestry and said, I believe I'm looking for my birth parents and any living relatives that might have. I was adopted at birth, given up at birth, and was adopted by a very loving family. I did not want to do anything while they were alive because he said I had a great life. And he's retired. He lives in California. He was a Lutheran minister until he retired from that. And now he works with the homeless issue in the greater Los Angeles area. Sent me a note and he said, I think your mother or her sister is my mother. He knew a little bit more about it than he let on at the time. He was pretty sure it was my aunt, but he just did that as a lead-in to pique my interest. I kind of ruled out my mother given the year he was born and the age that my mother would have been when he was born. She would have only been 15, not impossible, but unlikely. And her sister would have been 20. So I figured, well, it had to be Esther. So then I said, with that information, I went to my brother who stayed his whole life in Wisconsin, knows a lot more of the oral history in the family. Does he know anything about it? No. Went to my cousin, not my cousin Kay over here, but another cousin, and said, do you know anything about it? No. So then I said, well, I'm going to spring the news on Kay and say, Kay, do you know anything about your mother maybe having had a child out of wedlock before she married your father? Kay said, no, I don't. Never heard of it. That's very interesting. But the interesting was, she said, maybe not too surprising given some things I've heard about my mother. So she's an only child. She said, I always wanted a sibling, but never had one. So she didn't know anything. So back to the drawing board. We went back to Jerome, got some more information from him, and he pursued it. He did pursue it, trying to contact his mother, his Esther, because Esther was alive in the 90s yet. He went to Lutheran Child Services. They told him she was alive. They would contact her to see if he could strike up a conversation with her. She did not want to. She rejected 2 overtures, and Jerome said, I'll just give up on it. Don't bother her. That was in the 90s. So then he got his DNA done, contacted me, and I kept working it. And long story short, he also, when I looked at his DNA, I matched his DNA as a first cousin, but over here on the far right, his DNA also matched my wife, Cheryl, as a third cousin. So we knew his mother. We were very positive of that. But the relationship with my wife, we were trying to figure it out. We thought it might be one of the cousins, not one of her in her direct family, but one of her second cousins. They all lived in the same general area back in Wisconsin, just over the hill. And my mother's family and Cheryl's uncle's family, those kids all socialized. And so we figured it might be one of them. So we tried to get Keith Hunter, this one, to do his DNA to his matched Jerome. Never got that done. Well, about a year later, I got a note from a gal in Wisconsin who said, she sent it to Jerome, said, I think I know who your father is. And Jerome said, he sent it to me and he said, do you know, does your wife have any relationship or know anything about John Glenn Erickson? Cheryl did not know him. So working that back, found out that, yep, we've discovered that because I know John Glenn Erickson. He lived on a farm next to where I grew up with my grandparents. So I know him. I went to school with his son. And following it all through, the amazing thing of this story is using DNA and going down many avenues. There's many steps I'm leaving out here to figure out Jerome Nielsen sending me a DNA question, finding out, yes, he is my first cousin. He's a half brother to my cousin Kay, and she's ecstatic about having a brother now. And the same guy happens to be my wife's third cousin. So we got together in June of 19 because Jerome has a son that lives only 30 miles from my cousin Kay. He's ecstatic. We got together in Wisconsin at Kay's park in Kay's town. We had 40 people that showed up for this get together for all of us in the Wisconsin area and the family to meet Jerome, and for Jerome to meet his blood family because he had never met blood family. We had 40, we probably had about 30 people on Kay's side of the family, and about 10 came down from the John Glenn family that came down on this side. All ventured down to southern Wisconsin. They traveled about 200 miles from where they live. I went out for it. My brother came up from Missouri. We all met, and you would think there might be some uncomfortable moments in such a setting, but there wasn't. It was like the family had been together for ages. Everybody hit it off well. We had a great get together. And then Kay and I and my wife Cheryl and Kay's best friend, her husband has died. One of her classmates, who she's good friends with, Kay and her friend came out to California. We went out in January of last year, out to Palm Springs, and spent some time with Jerome, got to know he and his wife, and we had another great get together out there. And Kay and Jerome get together for writing. Jerome's a big writer. He's written a couple of short story books and stuff. They have a great sibling relationship. It's just a wonderful story. So that's how DNA can really help. I've had another DNA story like that, similar on my wife's side, which didn't turn out quite so well. Wasn't a happy finding. So you can find both very happy ones and ones that aren't so happy. And I've found a second cousin in Montana from the relatives that left from Wisconsin and went out there in the late 1800s. And we've had good conversations. So DNA is a wonderful thing, and it takes work, but it's good. It's a lot of good stories on it. So that's it on the DNA. And so any questions? I know we're past time, but it's as Rick said earlier, one of the problems with genealogy is you can really get involved and lost in it, and time can fly. That's the end of the story.
Question for Rick.
Yes.
Rick, you mentioned it's advantageous to join local genealogy. Do you know of any local groups in Westchester or Chester County?
Well, Ted and I do one just for Norwegian genealogy. But probably if you look around, I think, I know that Maris Grove has one. I don't know if not Maris Grove people can join that or not. But probably if you check with the library or something like that, they may, or with the County Historic Society, there may be some people there that could point you, or start your own.
Thank you.
I think Rick mentioned good to have a mentor, and that's so true because I view Rick as my mentor. He's the one that keeps me on task to pursue it. If I've been lax for a while, he'll ask me a question. I'll say, no, I haven't been working on that lately. So then it'll spur me on to get going again. So you need that little boost every once in a while. Okay, so that's any other questions you want? If you have anything that you didn't ask today and you want, either send Rick an email or send me an email and we can maybe help you out. Yes, Mr. Goodell, unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I have boxes and boxes of pictures, and what type of family record should I be leaving my kids? I just...
All of them.
Yeah, but are you doing it digitally, handwritten? Are the pictures, have you digitalized? I just go round and round about how.
Well, if you scan them in, then they can be available to anybody. You can send them out. Plus, you have that scanned record, but it's hard to give up the actual ones in your hand.
Yeah, I've been to that same point. I think digital is the thing to do. I've started trying to organize into family sets of different files, different folders for different families, to not just put them all in one file, but to create a file for my mother's side and her siblings, another file for my father's side, and then building a digital picture tree and put the digital pictures in there as I come across them. I'm not very far on that. It's more in my head at the moment than actual work on it. But that's what I want to do. And hopefully one of the grandkids will get interested in genealogy and make use of it. So far, I don't have any that, only one of them has indicated a little bit of interest. I know I got interested in genealogy when I was probably 10 years old, and I was at the family reunions, and they had this big roll of paper, and it would roll out all across the living room floor and into the kitchen when Dad had it at the home. And I just found it fascinating to look back at it. the sad thing is that scroll has been lost in the family. I've talked with all the cousins in Wisconsin. Nobody knows where it is. We have some ideas, but nobody's owning up to going through some storage places to try to find it. So that person's not that interested in genealogy. So, old piece of paper. But
I get
a lot of information.
I guess my other problem is that I think ancestry.com is great, but you have to pay a few $100s a year, and I'm not sure my kids want to do that.
Yeah, no, you have to have, I call it the burning desire to dive into genealogy, to fork over the money that's needed to do something. You can do a fair amount without without paying for the membership.
Yeah.
It's just easier when you have the membership. More stuff is open to you to get it.
Great job, guys. Thanks.
I wanted to recommend, if you get really deep into this, newspapers.com is great. And yeah, there's a subscription, but especially if you're from a small town where the newspaper is online. I mean, I found out what birthday parties my grandmother went to in 1900. And I found my great grandfather owned a restaurant in Percy, and you can find the ads for his restaurant. And
that's neat.
Some of this, if they made the newspaper, sometimes the story is not as favorable as you'd like. But newspapers.com goes way beyond just, you know, they were born, they were married, they had kids, they died. I mean, you can get human interest stories about your ancestors.
Yeah, no, you're right. That newspapers.com, I've had the membership on it. I don't think I have it active right now, but you can get, I'll call it, like you were saying, the human interest side of the genealogy as opposed to the statistical side. Betty, do you have any suggestions that you can add to what Rick talked about on how to go about genealogy? Because you've done some extensive genealogy from our coffee hour discussion.
I talk to some cousins occasionally. We share our mothers, and they like to talk. And they've come up with some stories that are a little different than what I heard. And I just write it all down and think about it and try to find out a little more about it. But it's difficult, and they're older than me, and I don't know how much longer I'll have these stories. But like, one of them told me that, hold on, never mind, spin. One of them told me that my mother was engaged before she married my father, and I had never heard that. But my father came back. My mother and father lived next door to each other, and the families knew each other really well. So finally, I got a name from one of them, and I looked him up, but it was a very common name, Smith, and the first name was common. And I kind of have a couple of hints, but it didn't work out, so it doesn't matter to me. But it was just something like, how did I never hear that all this time?
Yeah. Well, the story on Jerome that I was talking about, nobody knew. Well, I shouldn't say nobody knew. It wasn't common knowledge that my aunt had this child out of wedlock before she got married, other than my one cousin, who's I'm close to. She didn't know anything about it, but her younger sister had heard about it when Virginia asked her, and she she's close to herself. She's not very involved with the family, but Virginia asked her and said, "Did you ever hear about this?" She says, "Oh yeah, Mom gave me this necklace that she had got from Aunt Esther, and Aunt Esther had given it to her when she broke up with this guy that got her pregnant, and she didn't want to have that necklace anymore, so she gave it to my uncle's wife, Lucille, and Lucille gave it to Patty. Patty never said anything to anybody. She's about 4 years younger than me. But when Virginia asked her about it, if she knew anything about Esther having a child out of wedlock, she said, yeah. She said, I didn't think anything of it. So she just had never talked about it. So the knowledge was there, it just never got passed down.
I have a question. I asked my brother-in-law about one bound genealogy that I knew that was in my husband's family. And they came down from Connecticut a few years ago with boxes. And I wanted this one book, and they gave me the boxes and boxes and boxes, which is going to take me a while to go through. But one of the items was an old Bible that's this thick
Yeah.
and
good.
moldy, and the back's coming off, and it was like from a second cousin or something down the line. So but it had, because they often recorded vital records, that information I was happy to see coordinated with what I had already found. But my question is, the family does not want this Bible back. I don't want to keep it. What's the best place to donate it?
Historic Society is a good
From
the area.
well, from wherever this person who was given this Bible,
Yeah.
from that state, or
From their geographic area.
okay.
Not, yeah, if it was up in one of the areas of Connecticut is where the family grew up, I would get a hold of the Historic Society, as Rick says.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, General Dan.
One comment, our family, we've done some work on this. It's complicated, and you hear all these wonderful stories about things that you never thought you'd know, and it just blows your mind. It's great. But when you get into this, I think you got to be ready for some things you don't want to know.
Oh, yes.
Some things that are not pleasing. Part of my family is just a big yawn. I have enough to put me to sleep, and my genealogy sometimes put me to sleep. I mean, it's just a big yawn. So there's different sides of this story, I guess I'm saying, isn't there?
Yeah. Okay.
Just one other thing. I had my DNA done, and of course I talked with my old friends still back in Massachusetts, where I'm from, and eventually they got theirs done, and we all worked on our trees. And surprise, surprise, two of my very best friends, it turns out when you go way, way back, we are related.
Like Rick and I
to people on the Mayflower.
Yeah.
That cracked them up. To me, it was like, oh yeah, the Mayflower did that. I'm learning more about other people who did, who worked, I don't know, just different kinds of things I'm interested in.
I think I had family on the Mayflower, so it must have been a big ship.
Okay. Well, I think that's about it for today. So I think we'll draw it to an end.
Yeah, we're done.
That was good.
Ted, stay on. I need to talk to you.
All right, I'll have a chat.
Thank you.
Okay, Ted,
I'll see you down there.
okay, about half hour or so.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
So Ted, I got to say, the takeaway I have from this presentation is ultimately we're all related to each other.
Well, eventually, if we go back far enough.
Yeah, and I guess we'll find out eventually we all came from Adam and Eve.
Well, I was just going to say that Rick and I are working on the chart. Adam and Eve up here, and we're working it down.
Right, exactly.
So what's on your mind?
Well, you were talking about having this barbecue, and as I explained to you, I don't know my schedule except a week before time.
Having which?
I only know my schedule a week
Yeah.
before it happens. So, for example, next week I have the 25th, 26th, 28th, or 30th. I'm always free on Sundays afternoon.
Oh, for the get together that who sent that note out? Craig?
Huh?
Craig sent that note out, right?
Yeah, but I thought you were involved with it.
No, I'm not organizing it. I'm just going to attend and.
Oh, you were just, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were.
Yeah. No.
So it's Craig Garner?
Yeah. Craig volunteered his is dead.
Oh, Craig.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I needed to know.
Okay. Sorry, can't help you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.